All right, it's that time again. Welcome in, everyone, to another Buckeyes live show. It's our 46th edition, and when we do it right, when we're at full strength, when we're maxed out, this is what we've got. Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts 247 Sports, Kevin Noon from Buckeye Grove on Rivals, and then Tony Gerdeman, of course, from the Ozone. How are you guys doing today?
Doing
pretty
great.
good.
We're almost getting used to this quarantine life. Well, maybe not.
No, not really.
Oh, so yeah, how's everybody making out with the new lifestyle? What are you guys doing with yourselves these days? Just writing from home? It's pretty much what you guys do anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Just less going out afterwards.
That's too bad.
Yeah, this time of year you'd really only go into Columbus for spring practice. Spring game would have been tomorrow. There'd maybe be some spring basketball events that I'd go to. We would have just wrapped up the tournament. Now obviously Ohio State probably wasn't going to go 3 weekends deep into it, but
Hater.
yeah, I'm a hater, but certainly there would be other stuff going on. It's just right now we would be moving into the off season, and honestly, after the spring game, until about mid-July, what would that be? Almost 3 months. It is kind of quiet, but going to be even quieter this spring and summer, though.
We would have the recruiting camps, though, coming up in June, and those have already been put off for good.
So at least Gene Smith, athletic director, was not quiet this morning. So you guys heard from him and were able to hit him up on some timetables, theoretically, regarding the college football season for Ohio State. So what did Gene Smith bring us? We'll start with Steve. We'll go to Tony and then to Kevin.
Yeah, he answered questions for almost an hour, and there were a lot of different angles that were probed. And obviously, it's impossible for him to put a date certain on anything. I think until the medical experts nationally and in each locality have come to a consensus that it's okay to come back out of our homes. At this point, it'd be impossible to say that they can start practicing for the fall season on June 1st, July 1st, or whatever. I know Ryan Day, he was on ESPN's Get Up this morning, and he said ideally you'd have about a 6-week run up, given the fact that there was no spring football and there won't be much of a summer program for these guys either in terms of strength and conditioning, you wouldn't think. So he thinks it would probably be in addition to the usual 4 weeks of preseason camp starting on August the 1st for a September the 5th startup of the season, that you might want to start a couple of weeks earlier, which in theory would be there to allow the athletes to get in shape and get ready for the upcoming season. But again, until you get to that point that you are certain from a medical standpoint that it's safe to congregate again, it's impossible to predict when that's going to happen. So it's April the 10th. They still got several months to sort this out. The indications are that the models seem to be moving in the right direction. But again, this is just a one day at a time approach. And again, nothing date certain from Gene today other than some ideas and some abstract ideas that hopefully if it's done by this day, you might be able to get back on the field by that day.
Yeah, that was the big thing that Smith was talking about, is that if he was asked, about all of these models that are coming out, what about non-conference, or what if you start in November, can you finish in February? And he said before, we're not even looking at any of these models right now because he and everybody else, the administrators, the athletic directors, the commissioners and coaches are trying to come to a consensus of how long do they need to get ready to play. And as Steve said, Ryan Day mentioned 6 weeks. I know Kirk Ferentz was on another ESPN show a couple of days ago and said he would prefer 8 weeks so you'd have 4 weeks of strength and conditioning and then 4 weeks of practice. And so even as Ryan Day said today, 6 weeks would be like a starting off point, and then you go from there. But you have all of these different entities who have to agree, and the NCAA is now getting involved. They've got a COVID-19 advisory panel looking into the medical, the timing, all of these different aspects of it. So when we talked to Gene Smith a month ago, I asked him, is the college football season in jeopardy? And he said, we're not even looking that far ahead. And even now, a month later, you're starting to look that far ahead, but you really can't before you know how long it will take before you can even start playing. So if the models start showing, well, they could, you could be started by November. Well, first they have to figure out, well, when would they start camp and when would they start pre-camp? And then you go from there. So once they figure that out, then I guess they can start looking at models. But even then, who knows where we're going to be May 10th?
Exactly. And Gene was also asked about what it would be like, the potential of having games without fans in the stands or students on campus. And, he brought up some very valid points that we've heard elsewhere about, well, if it's, if university leaders or, the governors are saying that it's not safe enough to have students on campus or fans in the stands, why are you going to put the athletes out there in harm's way? So, there's a huge economic impact when it comes to, these football weekends, these 7 home dates that Ohio State has, $5 to $7 million when you look at ticket gate and concessions and parking. And then you add in everything else too, with the 100,000 people that mill around Lane and High who may not even go into the game, and the hotels for people who come in, from out of town and whatnot. I mean, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And while, obviously there's the goal of saving the television money, which is very real money at this point, it certainly trickles down. And then he was also asked as well about whether, what happens if they decide to take the non-conference away, or they delay the start of the season, by a couple of weeks, or, move it into the spring. And he, essentially said that he hasn't even started to have those thoughts on that point, but he did allow himself to think for a second on the no fans and the stands thing, and quickly came to that conclusion, but that he needs to really go in and kind of look at things to kind of check his blind spot.
Well, there has to be a drop dead date in regards to getting the season underway on time, I would think. There at least has to be that.
He was asked that, and I don't believe he gave one. I think that was one of his, well, we're not that far out yet. We're still looking at things. Mark, we'll get back to you on that one at a later time. But yeah, I mean, they have to have that because, but then you just, I guess you move out from that 6 to 8 weeks and you apply it to when you would normally start, last week and in July, first week in August is when camp normally starts. But how much time do you need before that? 2 weeks of strength and conditioning, 4 weeks. So yeah, that drop dead date starts to kick in. I thought it was interesting. Day and Gene Smith both brought this up, that different states have different rules. So at one point, because Ohio has been so proactive and strict with their rules, maybe they are one of the first states to unrestrict people, to let people gather again, and Ohio State is able to start practicing. But then you've got, say, Michigan, who is still 4 weeks away from being able to do the same thing or something like that. And so there's some unfair things going on there, which is why the NCAA is also going to get involved. But somebody brought up on the call, imagine if this happened instead of when it did. Imagine if it happened late in the season of college football, and now you've got some teams that can bring back more players and more seniors, and how unfair that would be to other teams. And Gene Smith acknowledged, like, well, things are just different with football, and you can go ahead and okay the fact that Ohio State baseball is going to have 2 20-person freshman classes or whatever consecutively, and they'll figure out a way to do it. But if you had a whole like senior class that was allowed to come back, and some schools like Wisconsin, they're not going to foot the bill. They're not going to allow the spring seniors to come back. And so some schools allow it, some schools don't. And for the schools that do, that becomes an unfair advantage. And then, there would be some people complaining like, well, it's not fair for us because we can't afford it. So why can you? And then there would have been just a whole bigger issue of yelling and screaming at that point. So I guess it's not that it's ever good that this happened, but there's less drama, if you can say that, happening now than if it happened in November.
Yeah, the models that were released over the last day or two are very encouraging. It's still horrible, and we're at the peak of it right now, but they've been upgraded considerably based on what I saw from a number of sources just in the last couple of days, and we're at that tipping point to where it's supposed to, if people continue to do the right things, supposed to plunge pretty considerably over the next 3 to 4 weeks. But at the same time, there are always going to be people out there that are asymptomatic that have it to some degree. So we're going to be running a risk of congregating for a long, long time into the future.
Yeah, and at risk of not trying to, sound like a medical professional here, a vaccine 12 to 18 months away, under the best of circumstances. So, I mean, really, it's going to be a matter of finding treatment. I mean, medical professionals aren't even sure that if you get it once, if you can get it a second time. So there certainly are a lot of questions there that are going to have to be addressed. And I was reading something of some commissioner out in California, Santa Clara County, making it sound like, oh, we're going to be in this for a really long time. And, you just don't know, because everybody, in order to do this, everybody's going to have to be able to come out of it at the same time. You're not going to be able to pick and choose. You're just going to have a bunch of glorified scrimmages at this point. If California, New York, and Washington State don't participate, and so on and so forth. So, I don't think any of us really have any great idea of what the future holds. And to go back to something that Tony said in his opening statement, it's April 10th. We don't know what things are going to look like on May 10th. We don't know what stuff's going to look like on April 11th, to be quite honest.
Yeah. And you mentioned there's no good college football in California or New York anyway, so we can go on without those states. But truly, one of the things Gene Smith talked about was not playing a game in an empty stadium, because he said if it's not good enough to have fans in the stands, how can you expect teams coming from different states to play each other on the field and trust and hope that no one's going to infect one another or whatever it would be, which is kind of a valid point. It was pointed out to me, though, that student athletes in that 18 to 22 year old frame are probably less likely to get it, but less likely is not good enough. I don't think. I think it's got to be like an infinitesimal to 0% chance that somebody's going to contract this by playing in a college football game. And as some people have said, there's people dying out there. And as other people have said, we're just trying to keep you safe. So I think we're looking at playing the long game on this one and not having anything resolved quicker rather than or sooner rather than later.
Less likely to get it and less likely for it to be serious, but I don't care who you are. If it's a 1% chance, you still don't want to hear that. Hey, yeah, I'm going to be the one out of 100 people that it's going to strike, and it's going to strike seriously, even though I'm 20 years old. That's obviously still running a risk. That there's risk in life, period. But obviously, this is something that we're all dealing with. That's out there. That's a secret enemy of sorts, a unknown and unseen enemy of sorts. So you guys have probably heard the plan that's been rummaged around concerning Major League Baseball, basically quarantining the entire league and allowing them to play in a series of fields that are within 50 miles of each other. Obviously, by having empty stadiums, college football could do that to some degree. And then if you test all the players and they're only in contact with themselves and the personnel on each team, and then you kind of restrict it to a certain group of people.
Well, and that was one of the things Gene Smith said. He'd have to talk to people about his blind spot with that issue. And there will be ways. I mean, there's already ways to get a quick turnaround. I just imagine what it's going to look like in July or August in terms of the availability and how quickly you can get these determinations. And, are you sick? And then if you aren't, then can you travel? And if somebody tests positive, they stay home. But how accurate are the tests? And right now, I don't know that, I've seen numbers like 70% and 80%, and that's for some of the older tests. I'm sure everything's going to get better and quicker and more accurate. But at some point, do you start to, I guess, maybe look bad in the public's eye for putting the players out there saying, hey, we need you to go out there. And we know there are some champions of the young people and social media that will rail against putting them in danger, and seemingly some football writers out there who are bound and determined to kill football. And so this would be a huge cause for people like that. And it would just seem strange to be able to put players, I guess, in harm's way if you can't put students. But there will be tests, and there will be this, and there will be that. And Ryan Day said, any football is better than no football. So whether that's no fans, you start later, whatever. And I agree with him. Any football is better than no football. But will you have these higher ups who are okay being seen as somebody putting teenagers in harm's way, in danger of any kind, even though this is football, which in itself is dangerous? But
I'm on Team Gundy. We got to start running some money through this state. So, and the only way we're going to run money through this state is through football. So I'm Team Gundy all the way. And how unenlightened or ignorant did he sound? And I know it was just one snippet of probably an hour's worth of stuff, but
it's all it takes.
Yeah, 1 5-second snippet's all it really takes to bring down a regime sometimes. But I don't know. Again, this is just we're at the beginning of this journey still, even a month into quarantine here in Ohio. I think it's one foot in front of the other, and you just hope that after 2 or 3 months that we're able to look at a different reality is all that you can really hope for right now.
Well, it's the same debate. In some aspects, it's the same debate, but it's a different debate that's being waged about opening the economy versus people's health and safety. You can't put a value on a life. If we can save one person versus an amount of money, nobody's going to make that debate. But people are losing their jobs, losing their livelihood. So it is affecting lives. And so there's a decision to be made. There's a balance to be made, a reasonable amount of safety. Okay, what can we do, and what can we do to restrict the normal flow of life and business out there that's going to reopen our society, but at a certain rate, at a certain pace that makes it as reasonably healthy and safe as possible. And that's what it comes down to. Our guy Lucas Abner is asking a football question. I don't know what driving the bus has to do with this, but a question for all three of them. My opinion doesn't matter, I guess. Driving the bus for whomever is going to have a breakout season, however you term breakout season. I know I have my certain definition of breakout season, but Kevin, who could possibly have a breakout season, offense and defense, for this team?
On the offensive side, do I really want to take the bait and say Jeremy Ruckert, a tight end in the Ohio,
spring.
It is spring, so this is, if there's going to be a time we're going to talk up the tight end position, it would be now. So I'll say I think Jeremy Ruckert could have a huge role. I mean, he's not going to lead the team in receptions or anything by that stretch of the imagination, but I think he's just too talented, and that's not taking anything away from Luke Farrell or any of the other tight ends as well. But I think he's somebody that could step up offensively. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I think that this could be a big year for Baron Browning, whether they slide him down to more of a rush end position. He plays kind of a bit of a hybrid, not necessarily a kind of like the Viper that they run up north. But, you know, if he kind of does a little bit of both, I think this really could be a year that he could. I mean, he's had all the physical tools and everything there. It's just really been a matter of finding that position that works for him. And honestly, it's been a bit of a locked up. Linebacker positions have been locked up with starters for a couple of years, and he just doesn't get the reps that, you know, you would have expected from a former 5-star like we had him here at Rivals. So I'll say Baron Browning on the defensive side.
I'll go ahead. You know, Garrett Wilson, you know, do we count him as a breakout guy? I mean, he made so many big plays last season, but he was kind of split in time, I guess, at times. I'd say that he's a guy that could double his numbers perhaps from a year ago. I don't have his exact stats in front of me. I guess I could take 1 second and look him up, but I think he's a guy that has the potential to take his game to another level on offense. If I had to pick maybe one of those younger running backs, Crowley or Chambers, if they're able to get into a game early in the season before Master Teague can get back full go. Of course, you have Trey Sermon there now that's going to take some reps if he's healthy. So that would be interesting. Wilson last year, 30 catches, 432 yards, and 5 touchdowns. You know, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to say he could make that into 50 or 60 and close to 10 touchdowns if he's given the chance, if not more. So I think he's an obvious pick, though. I think, again, maybe you're looking for somebody who has never been at this level, perhaps a go-to guy like he was at times last year. Maybe Jackson Smith-Njigba, just based on what we saw one day of practice. He caught everything thrown in his area code, and he was pretty exciting to watch. Defensively, I like his pick of Baron Browning. I think he's been in the shadows for far too long, and he's got an opportunity as an every down player, perhaps that maybe he's never really had if he's out there that much. So that would be good. Where they really need it are at defensive end and at cornerback. They really need somebody at both of those positions to flash up. You got one dependable guy at each position. I think Zach Harrison at defensive end, with the idea that Jonathan Cooper and Tyreek Smith are good players, but, you know, I don't think either of them are going to be confused with Chase Young anytime soon. And then at corner, you know, you're looking at Seven Banks and Cam Brown particularly. Maybe Tyreek Johnson is a guy that jumps up and really helps him alongside Sean Wade. Sean Wade's the one proven guy. So one of those young corners, one of those other defensive ends, maybe a Jean Baptiste or a Teron Vincent or somebody can jump up and be that kind of a guy, or a Tyler Friday, I guess, more appropriately than Vincent. But yeah, I'm excited to see some of these guys who we have only seen kind of scratch the surface of what they can do become household names, provided we have football in the fall. Which was the first 15 minutes of our discussion.
Yeah. The correct answer is Garrett Wilson on offense, provided there's a full season. I think if they keep him in the slot where they have moved him to in the spring, you're looking at 70 catches for that guy. Kevin Wilson compared him to or talked about how they used Ryan Broyles at Oklahoma, and Broyles, I think in his junior year, caught about 110 passes. And so they see Garrett Wilson like that. I'm not saying 110 passes, and I'm not going to say 90 catches like Paris Campbell had, because some of those were just jet sweeps. But, I could see 75 for, 1,000 yards, something like that. Another guy on offense to watch would be Harry Miller, probably at left guard, sophomore, who everybody raved about last year as a freshman center, coming in already knowing checks and slides and all these different protections that he shouldn't have as a freshman, impressed everybody. So when people talk about him like that, you would expect him to be one of those guys. And they don't need him at center. They've got Josh Myers. There's a job open at left guard. I assume he would be there and do very well. Defensively, I'll give you one guy at each level. Zach Harrison would be that guy. His numbers as a freshman were pretty comparable to Chase Young and Nick Bosa. And he's supposed to be that next guy, top 10 player nationally in high school. So we'll see. But don't forget about Tommy Togiai at nose tackle. Junior now, Devon Hamilton and Robert Landers are gone, so he's going to be the guy. I like the pick of Baron Browning. I would compare maybe what they're going to do with him to what Michigan did with Josh Uche, where sometimes he would be a linebacker, other times he would be a rush end. And he also could maybe do some of the dropping back because he is so athletic. I mean, this is a guy, his senior year in high school, played some corner because there were injuries, and he's, 6'3", 240 or whatever, running a 4.5. And then my pick in the secondary, it has to be Josh Proctor at safety, but I'll go Cameron Brown at corner. I think he's due junior now, so I'm looking at him to be the next guy next to Sean Wade, wherever these corners line up, because we still don't know.
And for Lucas, who asked the question, his offensive player is Jameson Williams, who was obviously highly regarded, although certainly not in the spotlight that Garrett Wilson was in that same recruiting class. And Lucas cites a huge play against Miami of Ohio there.
And he'll team with Chris Olave, and they'll be they'll switch off and on at that Z position, and so he's going to play a lot, and he is dynamic, as we saw. Looks like Ted Ginn in the open field. I'm not saying, I'm just saying.
6 catches, 1 touchdown for Williams last year. And, of course, the NFL draft is coming up in a couple weeks, and Ohio State will once again be able to boast its mantra as DBU, with Jeff Okudah at the top of the charts, and Jordan Fuller should get a good look, and Damon Arnett as well. So before we get to the NFL draft, I see that Tony Grimes, the number 1 cornerback in the country, has Ohio State on what you could consider a short list of 8. Is that does anybody have a lean on Mr. Grimes?
Ohio State will be a hat on the table. He's going to Georgia. Sorry. That's how I see that one going. I feel pretty confident in that he's going to end up at Georgia.
Don't you know how to sell subscriptions?
I'm selling subscriptions by showing that I'm concise. I'm concise in saying that. I guess I could sit there and, I mean, yes, getting him on campus again is going to be important. Ohio State's done a masterful job. They're doing a great job with all the recruits becoming recruiters and whatnot, but I just think that the odds are awfully long. I mean, Tony Grimes has been on campus before, so it's not a case of a guy who just doesn't know what Ohio State looks like or whatnot. He's had the opportunity to see him, but it'll be important to get him on again. But that's just not one that I see happening.
Just had a conversation with Rick Ciratella from NFL Draft Bible over the last couple days. We carved through all the positions, both sides of the ball. Ohio State will not have any wide receivers that place extremely high. Of course, Paris Campbell and Terry McLaurin showed themselves pretty well, especially McLaurin at the next level, their rookie seasons. KJ Hill is the all-time receptions leader at Ohio State, but he's down the board, as is Austin Mack and Benjamin Victor. And Bedevil 11 asking if Benjamin Victor is going to get drafted. I would think no.
Good question. I think Victor and Mack are iffy for the late rounds. I don't know. I mean, both of them have some tremendous upside, I think. I think Hill's dependable, but I'm not sure he has the spark to be a 2nd or 3rd round pick, but maybe a middle round pick. I don't know. I'm open on those guys. I think, Mack just could never be healthy at Ohio State. Victor was just so inconsistent at Ohio State. You just never knew what you were going to get out of him one game to the next. And I think he played some really good football his last year, I think, and that Penn State game from 2 years ago was probably the play of his whole college career. But I don't know. Inconsistent and injuries, just don't – I mean, you have to test really, really well to overcome that. And I'm not sure they're going to do that. So, obviously, no pro day now. And, the NFL, the NFL waits for no man or no virus. They are moving straight ahead, and they don't care. So there's going to be a lot of mistakes made in this draft, I would think.
Yeah, who does it benefit not having the pro days and having the the workouts, the individual workouts and whatnot? Does it, I mean, are some of those hidden gems out there, maybe at the smaller schools, do they not get seen? Do these NFL teams kind of default back to programs that they're familiar with? I mean, obviously, if you're coming in and you've been keeping an eye on the Chase Youngs and the Jeff Okudas of the world, you're going to know the Ohio State personnel well. You're going to know the Alabama personnel well. You're going to know them. So, you know, I don't. The NFL certainly does every little thing they can to analyze and go frontwards and backwards and sideways. So, I mean, I'm not expecting them to just sit there and go all willy-nilly and just pick, foolishly, but, there could be a benefit for big schools. I mean, schools that are highly scouted in these types of situations, just out of familiarity, breeding some sort of being comfortable.
Yeah, and I had a scout tell me that the teams will just have to rely on the scouts more, rely on the tape and less on the pro day. So they're happy about that, because then, as long as they're right, if they're wrong, then it's not going to look so great when teams had to put so much stock in what the scouts are telling them, and then they go out and draft guys who look good on tape, but then you get them into your facility and they're running a 4.82 as a wideout. And that's an area where Austin Mack and Ben Victor, as Steve said, both those guys needed to show good times. And I don't know that any of them, including KJ Hill, are more than a 4.6 guy. And KJ Hill at least is able to get open, and he was able to get open and impress the scouts and with the Senior Bowl and things like that, where he catch everything, do everything right, dependable. And I think nobody is under the illusion that he's an outside guy. Everybody sees him as a dependable slot. What does that make? 4th or 5th round, I would assume, for teams who are looking for that, and maybe you slide down even from there. But for outside guys like Ben Victor and Austin Mack, they've got good size. And Ben Victor, I think, benched 225 about 9 times at the combine, so that's not great. Ohio State had better guys or more productive guys than those two over the years while they were playing, but it just didn't seem like they could get, like when Garrett Wilson, his freshman year, he came in and teamed with Ben Victor at the X, and there was it looked like Garrett Wilson very much belonged and did not lessen the position. He raised the position. Chris Olave did the same thing at the Z, where these young guys made the position better, and they were teaming and partnering with Mac and Victor. So, when you look back in history at those two, they would compare probably less favorably than like Brian Hartline and Brian Robisky. When those two were together, like a tandem like that, they would be below that, well below Santonio Holmes and Ted Ginn. Just never quite gave what they expected. Even you guys remember Austin Mack was really good as a true freshman spring. He lit it up as a true freshman in spring, and you're like, whoa. And then that wasn't his peak, but I guess it was kind of a tease. And as Steve said, injuries have never been kind to him.
I'm thinking that just by looking at Benjamin Victor, that if he bench pressed 225 9 times, I'm guessing that's about 9 more times than he did it when he arrived on campus, because he was like a beanpole.
And was never able to get.
I was going to say, you got to remember too, though, how long he is and everything else. Covering, putting 225 up and down 9 times is probably the distance of a normal receiver doing it 13 or 14 times, just because of that. But yeah, I had the chance to cover him in high school. We went down to his high school in South Florida and talked to him then, and it certainly was a situation where you thought once he got into a nutrition program and was, getting a lot more calorie intake, that he would put on weight, but he's just got one of those metabolisms that certainly I don't have right now. Maybe I did back in the day, but not like that now.
You're getting some looks from Tony over here.
I ignore that jerk. I don't care what he says.
Jeffrey Okudah has certainly distanced himself from the field. He is like the lockdown D guy at corner, and it's a decent cornerback class from guys from Alabama, Florida, LSU right behind him, but he is the consensus #1 corner, top 3 or 4 player in the country.
And a guy you start from day one, I would assume, outside even. You know, sometimes you draft these first-round corners late in the draft or late in the first round to, you know, put them in the slot like the Denver did with Bradley Roby a few years back. But Okuda's a guy you just plug in, and you better, because you're taking him that high. Now, I've seen a lot of talk where Detroit might try to trade out of that #3 spot and maybe still get him, or maybe get Isaiah Simmons. But there's a track record there for guys drafted that high, cornerbacks at Ohio State drafted that high. And, you know, how many better corners have we seen at Ohio State just in the last, 10 or 15 years? I don't know. I mean, Marshawn Lattimore was really, really good, but he was a one-year wonder. Okuda's put in more time.
Yeah, talking about Detroit, I mean, they could try to slide down to 5 or 6 and still be able to get him, as somebody might want to move up for Tua. But Detroit really made its lot when it dumped one of its other corners to sit there and show that they really needed to add a corner, and Okuda makes sense. And if I were wagering, which I'm not very good at, I would still say Okuda lands at 3 to Detroit, because they can't take that chance. I mean, Isaiah Simmons is a hell of a consolation prize, but they absolutely need an A1 corner right now.
The Lions, you think they might do something wrong?
They could draft another receiver again, but that goes back to the Matt Millen days.
Exactly. He's not around anymore.
The
if
world.
There was a GM that I would never have flagged to be the guy that would draft a wide receiver every year, it was Matt Millen, who's blood and guts, line play, but he was drafting Mike Williams and all sorts of receivers every year.
I would expect, we're going to go get Paul Posluszny.
Sure.
We're going to go get, Go ahead,
the world is going to turn on its axis when the Detroit Lions and the Cleveland Browns play in the Super Bowl. Neither of them have ever been. And we'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone one of these years, probably 30 years after I'm dead and gone. But
so the lightning's going to strike at once in both conferences at the same time.
Yes. So talking about Okuda and corner, I mean, of course, there's a lot of people who are writing a lot about the history of Ohio State football right now with the hiatus and position lists and all-time this and all-time that. But cornerback has been, and I've got a list of the former starters here. I mean, back to Antoine Winfield and Sean Springs in the 90s, it's been a great position at Ohio State down through the years. Nate Clements played in the NFL for a while.
Ahmed Plummer.
Yeah, Ahmed Plummer was drafted. Chris Gamble played in the NFL for about 10 years. He was really good, and he was a wide receiver originally at OSU, and in 2002 played both. Dustin Fox was a starting corner on their national championship team. He had a cup of coffee in the NFL as well. Ashton Yabodi. Malcolm Jenkins, man, he arrived and he reminded people of Antoine Winfield when he arrived, because he was the nickelback as a freshman, kind of like Winfield was in 95. And then he took over as a starter for the following 3 seasons, kind of like Winfield did, and was outstanding. Donald Washington, how about him and the trouble he got into at various times in his career. And then that kind of winds down the Tressel era, Chimdi Chekwa and guys like that. Then you get into the more what the younger kids now call BIA, best in America. Everybody else can be DBU, but when you got Dorian Grant and you got Eli Apple and Tyvis Powell at safety and so on and so forth, and Garyon Conley and Marshawn Lattimore, everybody else can be DBU. Von Bell. Ohio State, they're on their own platform. They're BIA, and don't let anybody forget it. I mean, and especially BIA now that Kerry Combs is back at Ohio State. So the New Orleans Saints are bullish on Ohio State Buckeyes, although Bell and Apple are both out of there now, but Lattimore, I guess, still there. But it's been a crazy run for Ohio State in the secondary.
I think at one point, Kerry Combs, maybe by the time he left, all of his starting corners were either all Big Ten first team or first rounders.
Yeah.
Including like Travis Howard in 2012 and 2013, who was a all Big Ten, but I don't think he was drafted or maybe in like the 7th round, but just a litany of guys, even though they don't all pan out in the NFL. They did okay at Ohio State, So, and I think I think they'll take that kind of performance, all Big Ten corners year in and year out, and then it's up to them to perform in the NFL. And we've seen, Garyon Conley, I believe, has already been traded from the Raiders or went somewhere else, and so they still have some proving to do. We know Eli Apple, that gets criticized quite a bit, and wherever he goes. But I think Jeff Okudah, from the time he arrived, before then, he was viewed as a different level than those guys.
Yeah, no question. And I think Raiders fans were rejoicing when the Conley signing, or not Conley, but Apple, when the Apple signing didn't go through, they were kind of halfway rejoicing. But yeah, I guess we'll have to see how where he lands and how it ends up.
We all grew up during a time watching football when you had to have that guy at running back: Emmitt Smith, Barry Sanders, Jerome Bettis. We could go through the litany of great running backs in the NFL. Tony Dorsett, Franco Harris are the first couple of guys that I remember. And then we hit that period when the passing game blew up, and it has in stages since the 70s, but more recently, 10 to 15 years ago, where the running back became the combination of the passing game blowing up and a number of running back busts, and that position became a just grab a guy, and we need the offensive lineman to create space, but we just need a running back. It doesn't really matter who it is. And then the performance and the excellence from Zeke Elliott, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry kind of changed that, where we've seen some first-round running backs in recent years. So it'll be interesting, of course, to see where J.K. Dobbins lands and how much he's valued and if he sneaks into the first round.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate. I think he was a player that really could have used a good pro day performance on top of the combine. I think going into the combine, he was probably the number 1 back on a lot of boards right now. A lot of the mocks I look at now have him number 3 behind DeAndre Swift of UGA and Clyde Edwards-Helaire out of LSU. A lot of the mocks I look at still don't have a first round grade on any of the backs. I've seen a couple with Swift going late first, but I think he's going to be somebody in Dobbins. I know Miami seems to like him a good amount. Maybe in the second round there. I see him in the 50s, maybe early 60s. But I think whatever team gets him is going to get a great value. But yeah, the shelf life on backs are so short right now that teams are not putting a huge emphasis there. You look at the Todd Gurley situation with the LA Rams, sign him to the big deal, and then just have to basically cut him. I don't think you're going to see. I think that's where the trend's going to be right now.
Yeah, I see second round, unless somebody trades up to get him late in the first, because that's who they targeted. But you wonder when he will do a virtual pro day and show what he can do, because his ankle is still jacked up for the combine. But because there's times where I've talked to his high school coach a couple of years ago, and he hand timed him at a 4.30, which he said, so that's probably like a 4.45 laser or something like that. And if he could go ahead and do that, because I personally don't see DeAndre Swift or the LSU kid being better than him, because every field that J.K. Dobbins was on this past year, he was the best running back, arguably the best player, and that's Jonathan Taylor twice. And he was a guy who got better the more you gave it to him, and he wants the ball more, but is also not a selfish player. So he's a good locker room guy, and that way he can catch the ball, even though I know people want to criticize him for what happened in the Clemson game. He's a guy that can be used all over the field. He's 3 downs. He may be short or whatever, but he never played small. And I think he's a guy who instantly helps your team. But again, as you said, Mark, how valuable are running backs now when seemingly everybody has almost gotten to the point of, remember when the Denver Broncos could just throw anybody in there and they'd run for 1,500 yards. It didn't matter. And now, if you've got two guys who can give you 700 yards, do you need to spend one of those on a first or a second round pick? Probably not. That's why, who are the difference makers? Are they the guys you can't pass up on? And so you take them, and then everybody else just falls behind that. And, second, third, fourth round, if they fall, they fall. We can get them then. And if we can't get J.K. Dobbins, we'll get guys, instead of our number 2 running back, we can get our number 5 running back 2 rounds later.
Very true. Very true. As we bounce back and forth between the beginning of the collegiate career and the end, talking NFL draft and recruiting, I think David Greenshield brings up a good question here that I would love to get your take on in regards to Ohio talent. So we know that and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, the population of the state is pretty much flatline. It's not necessarily declining like it is in other parts of the country, but it's not increasing either. It's pretty much flatlined, or there's a slight increase of population in the state. So what has Ohio high school football talent looked like in the last few years, and how does it project for 2021 and 22? I'll start with you, Kevin.
I'm just pulling up our 2021 state list for Ohio. Ohio State obviously has done a good job in terms of getting 5 of the top 6. The only one getting away was Lorenzo Styles Jr., who's committed to Notre Dame, but that commitment seems to be maybe a little shaky at this point. It's been a strong year for the state, and I think that Ohio State could still look in state for a defensive end, Najee Story out of Solon. I think he's somebody that could be there, but when you look at the rest of, when you look at 7 and 9, they're both running backs, and Ohio State obviously is taking care of the running back position with Evan Pryor and with Trevion Henderson. But, there's certainly year in and year out, when I look at Ohio, you're always going to have the strong top 5, top 6 kids that are going to be there pretty much most seasons. It's what's there from like 7 to 20 that determines how good Ohio is going to be, in my opinion. We have that for sure here in 21. I haven't really had a chance to start really looking closely at 22. I kind of have seen who the top 5 appear to be at that point, and it's going to be good, but I don't know what the depth is going to be at that point. So I don't know if they're going to be those low 4-star, high 3-star guys that are necessarily going to be the guys at Ohio State is going to go all in on, but we got a long way to go.
Yeah, this past year they took 8 guys, I think, give or take, from the state of Ohio in the 2020 class out of about 24 signees, and 8 guys from Ohio is as many or more than they had been taking in some of the previous classes, particularly with Urban Meyer. So I think 6 of those guys are from the Cincinnati area. So Ohio State went in and owned Cincinnati and got Paris Johnson in particular, the one they had to get, the offensive lineman. Got his teammate Darian Henry as well, the defensive lineman. Couple of offensive linemen down the line with Jacob James and Trey LaRue this past year. So they did make a little bit more of an effort in Ohio, and in Ohio in particular, to take some 3- and 4-star guys who they hope will become frontline guys down the line, maybe projects I'd even put with Jacob James and LaRue, guys that you're probably not going to hear anything from the next couple of years, but maybe by their 3rd, 4th, or 5th year, they can crack the starting lineup. So Mayan Williams at running back put up some huge yards. Obviously, he'll have an opportunity to compete for time as a true freshman as well. Looking at 2021, like Kevin said, they've done a great job. Obviously, Jack Sawyer was a kid from Pickerington North they had to have. And so that's one that they swooped in and were able to take. So, yeah, I'm optimistic. Reed Carrico from Ironton, a linebacker that they're getting this year, is supposedly a big time guy as well. So, part of the thing, when you take kids from rural areas, you wonder about the quality of the competition. When you take a kid from Cincinnati St. Xavier or Cincinnati Elder or a school like that, you don't worry so much about that. And so Ohio kind of gives you that mix. Some guys from the big city schools, and some guys, like a Cade Stover, he's from halfway between Columbus and Cleveland, from Lexington, Ohio. Did he face the best competition in high school? You probably say no, he didn't, but he's a guy that can come into Ohio State and make a difference. So, to me, Ohio State's best teams have always had a backbone of Ohio guys. That was true with the national championship teams in both 2002 and 2014. And I think that, going forward, that's probably how it'll be as well. And maybe a little bit more under Ryan Day here, at least in the beginning, until he develops that national reputation as a recruiter.
Yeah, I think I agree with Steve where Ryan Day is more willing to grab some Ohio guys here, maybe rated a little bit lower. Because I go back to the Ohio State's 2012 class, which was Urban Meyer's first, and most of it was handed to him. All of these Ohio guys had committed and then committed probably to Jim Tressel and then stuck with Luke Fickell at that time. But you got a guy like Pat Elflein, who was a low 3-star, Jacoby Bourne, another low 3-star, and Tyvis Powell, who had to work hard for his offer. I don't know that those guys would have been offered if it was a normal Urban Meyer year, like if it was 2014 or 2017. I don't know that those guys get offered. But then look at the impact they had in that national title team of 2014. And then you start to look at Day's 2021 class where, there are some guys who are already committed out of Cincinnati that maybe don't have the biggest offers, like Devontae Smith out of Cincinnati LaSalle, who does have some good offers, but Jalen Johnson, the safety, is he a linebacker? Is he a safety? And at this point, I don't think it matters, but it is interesting to see him offering and extending more offers to Ohio kids. And that was one of the things that Urban Meyer did. And that was one of the things he talked about. I think maybe his first signing day was that they want to do more of that, and that is going to continue to be a focus. And Mark Pantoni and Urban Meyer always talked about how they wanted more Ohio kids, but it was kind of up to the Ohio kids to be there. And I think maybe what Ryan Day is saying is they are there, and we're going to go grab a couple more.
As is the case each and every week, we've got the most on the line at the point in which we're ready to wrap it up here. So 86 on the line. So most of you have missed a great portion of the show. So wait till the video posts and then go back. We've talked Gene Smith's statement concerning the pandemic and how that affects the football season, recruiting in the NFL draft as well, plus your questions that you brought in the live chat. So I appreciate everybody jumping on board that's been able to join us live. And of course, the contributions of these guys, I hope you guys out there watching appreciate. Kevin Noon, Tony Gerdeman, Steve Hellwagon. You can catch Steve on Bucknuts 247 Sports. Tony's at the ozone.net, and also Kevin Noon at buckeyegrove.com. Appreciate you guys. Again, it's been a great show, great contribution, and we hopefully can get together next week. A lot of comments just in the last few minutes about Davon Hamilton and his status at the NFL draft. We will certainly dive into that. I've seen some good things about him possibly being a top 5 to 6 guy, defensive lineman, hand in the dirt guy that can project well to the NFL as well. So we'll got 2 more sessions for the NFL draft that we can certainly talk more Buckeyes toward the NFL.
Mark, can I just say one thing about this?
Yep.
Lucas Abner's question here. Don't get hung up on who the starters are at defensive end. Nick Bosa, I think, started 10 games in his career. Ohio State rotates those guys. So consider the 4 defensive ends all co-starters. You remember 2017 when it was Sam Hubbard, Jalen Holmes, Tyquan Lewis, and Nick Bosa. Those guys were all starters, but 2 of them didn't start. So don't get hung up on that. Tyreek Smith, Jonathan Cooper, Zach Harrison, they're all starters, and probably Tyler Friday or Javonte Jean-Baptiste. So it's a 4 or 5 man starting unit. So don't get too concerned about that.
For sure. All right, guys, thank you so much. We'll figure out a time for next week, and we'll be back here with another Buckeyes Live next week. Thanks, guys.
Take care.